At last night's MSNBC town hall, Donald Trump got in a lot of trouble for some comments that he made about abortion. It appeared that he thought he's going to win over the pro-lifers with what he said. Instead, his supporters are now scrambling to defend him. Pro-life organizations are attacking him, and of course, the left is as well. In case you didn't actually see that exchange, here it is.
Do you believe in punishment for abortion? Yes or no, as a principle?
The answer is that there has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah, there has to be some form.
10 cents, 10 years,
I don't
what?
know. That I don't know. That
Why
I don't
not?
know. I don't know.
You take positions and everything else.
Frankly, I do take positions and everything else. It's a very complicated position.
But you say bluntly you're pro-life, meaning you want to ban it.
But the Catholic Church is pro-life.
No, let's not talk about my religion.
But no, I am talking about your religion. Your religion. I mean, you say you're a very good Catholic.
I didn't say very good. I said I'm a Catholic. What? And secondly...
I hate that ridiculous debate. Okay, why don't we talk about the Hindu position on abortion? No, we're talking about your position because you're running. Now, we've got a lot of people, some people defending him, some people attacking him. I found this to be so interesting, not just because I think that it could hurt Donald Trump, especially in the general election, but it made me think about abortion in a slightly different way and question some of the things that I had assumed, both about my own position and the positions of pro-lifers. And so we're going to get to all of that. First, obviously, there are other Republicans currently trying to beat Donald Trump. Now, they're going to try to imply that they have a very different position than him. And so we're going to get to that right now. Chuck Todd was talking with John Kasich, and they had this interaction. Chuck Todd says, let me ask you this. How do you enforce a ban on abortion? Because that's where we got into this punishment thing. John Kasich says, well, look, I think it's rape, incest, life of the mother, and you build some restrictions around it. But I think you have to be very careful in the way you do it. We're a long way from there. And Ted Cruz put out a press release in part saying, on the important issue of the sanctity of life, what's far too often neglected is that being pro-life is not simply about the unborn child, it's also about the mother and creating a culture that respects her and embraces life. Of course, we shouldn't be talking about punishing women. We should affirm their dignity and the incredible gift they have to bring life into the world. Because if you want to show respect to a woman, the best way is to stop her from doing something that she fundamentally believes that she has the right to do. I've always felt, maybe I'm old-fashioned, I guess.
Well, you know, with Cruz, there's consistency. I mean, that's he talks about the culture all the time. The culture, however crazy or nuts you may think Ted Cruz is, he's good at his game.
Yeah.
And he's running, you know, objectively one of the best campaigns I've seen in a long time, sticking to what, you know, his message is. Lying about it, creating fiction about it, but at least appealing to the people he needs to appeal to.
Yeah.
And this is right there. You know, these comments are right there, as crazy as you might think they are. So he is about the culture of it, and he does not talk about it in sort of punitive ways or in terms of the law and the courts. He wants the courts to change it because it's American culture. The others are kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
And not that I agree, but
Kasich, we have to remember that not too many weeks ago defunded Planned Parenthood in his state. Extremely significant there. And as you're going to see a little bit later on in the show, Ted Cruz actually has supporters who are far more opposed to abortion than Donald Trump or even Kasich supporters are. Trump having the most liberal on that position.
But you should also, here's the other thing, is that, you know, there's this whole Lion Ted thing, right? And this whole, but the Republicans themselves, all 16 others that were in this race with Donald Trump, none of them believes that Donald Trump is really pro-life.
Yeah.
And so when he says these things, they seize on it as an opportunity also to question that to begin with. And so I think that is informing so much of this conversation that people don't think about. They say, oh yeah, there should be punishment. Donald Trump makes it up as he goes along.
Yeah,
and
he doesn't.
Really
he
pisses,
didn't know until that second that he was in favor of punishment.
Exactly. That's exactly right, Johnny. So when he does that, it's also coming from the place when you see these reactions, Republicans who are irate over the fact that he's even saying he's pro-life.
Yeah.
Because they don't believe he is.
Yeah, and he's previously said that he's very pro-choice. He says, I am pro-choice in every respect. He was even in favor at one point, in favor of late-term abortion.
Yeah.
And it's easy to say, look, people change. You know, you go through college, you do your philosophy class, and you change your position. But he was saying this when he was more than 50 years old. And it's not impossible to change after you're 50.
Right.
But it's a little bit harder to explain or worthy of explanation, and he hasn't explained that.
Well, others have changed. Dick Gephardt changed as he got older. He went from pro-life to pro-choice at an advanced age, I would guess older than 50. So it's not unprecedented. But when you change and make things up as you go along
Yeah.
constantly, it's a totally different animal that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And that's what pisses so many of these people off about Trump,
Yeah.
is this changing on a dime stuff.
Yeah, and the other people, some of the largest organizations around this country that are pro-life are pissed off at him because he says that they say that he is fundamentally misunderstanding what their mission is, and I'm going to return to that in just a second. But at least in the short term, it makes them look really bad. And there were tweets from some individuals affiliated with those organizations saying that he had, in 3 seconds, undone 50 years of messaging politically to try to convince people that they're not against the woman, they're just against the dirty, dirty abortionist doctor.
Yeah, and that's why the pro-choice movement is ecstatic
Oh,
by
they love
these
this,
conversations
yes.
going on, because it really does. I mean, that quote about undoing it is unbelievable, because it's, in a way, it's true. It's like, oh no, they called us.
Yeah,
you know?
you've rarely seen political framing dismantled as quickly
Right,
as that.
right.
We actually have a tweet from March for Life, one of these organizations, that says, no pro-lifer would ever want to punish a woman who has chosen abortion. This is against the very nature of what we are about, #pro-life. We also have pro-life Americans agree, the woman, another victim of abortion industry, should not and have not been prosecuted. So that's very interesting. Another victim. What I love about this, I want to get into the psychology behind it, because I think that Donald Trump, he's very rarely created learning moments for America, except perhaps about Islamophobia. But here I think that he has created one. Because these organizations are saying that they're not against the woman, they're against the doctor. But they also say that it is murder to kill a fetus. And yes, in the vast majority of cases, the woman is not the one who does the murder. But I got news for you. If you hire a hitman to kill your husband, you go to jail.
Right. Well, that's
doesn't
the whole,
matter that you didn't kill him.
That's the greatest thing about this conversation. It's like they're criticizing Trump for saying that a woman should be punished. Well, if it's against the law in your eyes, then everybody should be
Then
punished.
obviously she should be punished.
Yeah, exactly. If you're calling it murder, what, you're not going to punish murderers?
Yeah, now look, they might say what you see in their tweets is that she's a victim of the abortion industry. And so there's a very real chance that they don't see her as culpable for the same reason that women get a lot of disrespect from the right in this country, is that they don't think fundamentally that women are equipped to decide. Right. And that they may get an abortion, but they're just being convinced by the man or convinced by the doctors. They were just shopping for baby carriages and they got abducted by an abortionist, and they don't think that the woman fundamentally can choose for herself. But I love that he has uncovered this, because if you actually believe that it should be banned, then there has to be punishment.
Right.
And if you believe that it's murder, there has to be punishment for murdering a person. Either you believe that or you don't. And look, Kasich can evade it, and he did, and Ted Cruz can evade it, and he still continues to. These organizations can imply that they don't want the punishment. But at the end of the day, if it becomes illegal nationally or in these states, then there will be punishment, and they need to be intellectually consistent. Or we at least need to force them to show that they're not.
The whole Planned Parenthood argument, and that's how we've talked about abortion under that framework so far in this election. That might be past us now. We might now be going into the conversation about punitive abortion.
And Chris Matthews will be the one who took us there.
It's not where the Republicans want to be.
No, not at all. And of course, look, I would love to do a big rundown of this. I've seen some editorials that list some examples of this. But the idea, and you saw it in tweets from the organizations, we do not think you should punish the woman. Well, fuck you, because you guys already punished the woman in 1,000 different ways with the restrictions that you already have in place. We don't need to get anywhere near a nationwide or statewide bans. You already punished them financially. You forced them to miss out on work on multiple days in some cases. You forced them to do long waiting periods. You forced them to pay significantly. You forced them to have a harder time getting medical insurance. You forced them to travel, in some cases for hours, in some cases hundreds of miles away. You are all for punishing women. You just don't want to admit that you want to put them behind bars.